tonight, we begin with the sign-off.
And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6, 1981. I'll be away on assignment, and Dan Rather will be sitting in here for the next few years. Good night.
And to each of you, courage. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
And on that note, take care of yourself and each other.
Good night, and good luck.
The TV sign-off. The signature TV sign-off was started by that last guy you heard from, Edward R. Murrow, one of the first television reporters, in many ways a pioneer in our business, blah, 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 blah. Frankly, I work in this industry. I think Edward R. Murrow is totally overrated. We always seem to attach this odd reverence to firsts in American culture. Doesn't matter what it is. First case of COVID-19, the first person to weigh 1,000 pounds. We love the first. And Edward R. Murrow is credited with a lot of firsts in television news. We even hand out the vaunted Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Journalism every year. And if you get one of those, well, my word, you must be really good at journalism. And by the way, he went by Ed when he was alive. He was just Ed Murrow to his friends, like I'm Rob Finnerty. I don't go by Robert J. Finnerty. The Robert J. Finnerty Award for Mediocrity in Journalism. But Murrow was not above the fray. He was just as biased and partisan as Jake Tapper is today. In 1956, Edward R. Murrow worked to get Democrat Adlai Stevenson elected president. Now, it didn't work. Stevenson lost to Dwight Eisenhower, but Ed, was a Democrat, and he was biased and partisan. And right down the street from where I'm sitting right now, George Clooney, another person I would call overrated, is starring in a little play about Edward R. Murrow called Good Night and Good Luck. George even dyed his hair black. Take a look. And the legacy media were falling all over themselves earlier this month to be the first ones to write a glowing review of the play. They couldn't wait to write these reviews. The New York Times saying that Clooney makes Edward R. Murrow a saint of sane journalism for a world that still needs one. Variety says Edward R. Murrow's historic broadcasts take the stage version of the movie and has a seriousness of purpose that is dramatically chilling and as laser-focused as the penetrating gaze coming from its star, George Clooney. I just threw up a little bit in my mouth. Give me a break. It looks like all the praise, the decades of praise for this one very average Hollywood actor is starting to go to Georgie's head.
Trump tweeted about me, and then I just got one, I guess, from Musk. I don't care much in terms of what they say. We didn't, what we do in this is we talk about the responsibility of journalists to hold truth to power, right? That's our goal.
That's our goal. That's our goal. Like, you're a journalist as well? You see, all of a sudden, Georgie thinks that he's a real journalist and not just some guy standing on a piece of plywood 3 feet above an audience reading lines that he had months to memorize. Georgie actually thinks that he's Edward R. Murrow, like some method actor gone terribly wrong. And like so many Hollywood stars and pro athletes, they're all afflicted with an illness that's never been diagnosed. They all think that we care what they have to say. And this illness exists because no one ever asked these people any hard questions, any real questions, and no one ever criticizes them. Not really. And for 30 years, Georgie has been asked a combination of two basic questions. What are you wearing? And tell us about the movie. And reporters laugh with them and take pictures of them and gawk at them. Take a look.
You yourself did something that a lot of people would call brave when you wrote your op-ed.
Well, I don't know if it was brave. It was a civic duty, because I found that people on my side of the street, I'm a Democrat. I was a Democrat in Kentucky, so I get it. When I saw people on my side of the street not telling the truth, I thought that was time to...
Are people still mad at you for that?
Some people, sure. It's okay.
He's so brave, and he dyed his hair black. That's a real actor when you dye your hair black. You go to the store, you get hair dye that's black, and then you put it in your hair. Jake Tapper said, "You did something so incredibly brave when you wrote that op-ed." There it is again. Oh, George, thank you so much for saving us all. You're so amazing, and you're so darn handsome, and you're a wonderful actor, and I loved you in ER. You were like a real doctor, and your Boston accent in A Perfect Storm was my everything. I actually thought you were from Boston and not Kentucky, and I had to look it up. I Googled it and found out that you were from Kentucky, but your accent was amazing. In reality, CNN and the actual real facts are two very separate things once again. In reality, George Clooney acted like every other Democrat in Washington and in the legacy media. He acted just like fake Jake Tapper when it came to covering up Joe Biden's real condition. Georgie hid from the truth. He hid it from the American people, just like Jake and just like everybody else on the left. But why don't we actually look at the timeline and see what happened? Tell me if anything George really did was really so brave. We start on June 15th, 2024. George Clooney and Julia Roberts host a fundraiser in Los Angeles for Joe Biden. And they took this smiling photo together and raised $28 million to help Joe Biden beat Donald Trump. But during that fundraiser, something very strange happened that we weren't allowed to talk about or even notice. How dare you use your eyes to try and deduce that there might be something wrong with Joe Biden? Take a look. You remember that moment right there? But Georgie Clooney and Jake Tapper didn't say a word after that. No op-ed in the New York Times, no appearance on CNN. He didn't tweet anything about how Joe Biden looked that night. Not a thing. Fast forward now to June 27th. 2 weeks later, Joe Biden takes the debate stage with Donald Trump, and this happens.
Dealing with everything we have to do with, look, I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
Right. After the debate, nothing from George Clooney. Georgie didn't say anything for a whole 2 weeks. And then finally, on July 10th, 2 weeks later, Edward R. Murrow, the journalist, writes in the New York Times, "I love Joe Biden, but we need a new nominee." So brave, so historic, and so heroic. Here's Georgie again.
You've been around long enough to remember 1968. Every city in the United States was on fire. We lost Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. We were losing the greatest speakers we'd ever had. And we set every city in the country on fire. We had the Vietnam War was raging, the Tet Offensive, everything that was going on at that time in our country. President has to basically resign because Walter Cronkite said, that Vietnam's unwinnable. We've been in much worse places, actually.
Find some people who have a sense of humor and have a sense of purpose. That's what Georgie said. George, how about start with find a candidate with a brain? Find a candidate who doesn't have Alzheimer's or dementia? How about we start there, Georgie? By the way, the woman that he's talking to right there, an absolutely lovely person, a performer herself who treats her audience with nothing but the utmost respect.
Put your mask over your nose. That's why you're in the theater. That is the rule. If you don't want to follow the rule, get the out. Who do you think you are if you do not respect the people that are sitting around you? Salary. You pay my salary. Chris Harper pays my salary. Excuse me. Who do you think you are?
These people are just such complete phonies. And I'm sorry, Georgie, you're not a journalist. You're a rich, entitled actor, which is totally fine. I've got no problem with many of your movies. Many were terrible. But just because this week you're playing Edward R. Murrow on Broadway doesn't suddenly make you Georgie R. Murrow. I'm sorry, but you don't suddenly get to pretend that you have any idea what you're talking about. If you were a real, actual person, you would have written that op-ed in the New York Times the day after that fundraiser. But you didn't. You waited until it was safe. You waited until the coast was clear. And then Georgie parachuted in to save the day. And that's the way it is on this Thursday, April 24th, 2025.